should I or should I not tell people that I have ADHD? Do I declare or don't declare if they had a formal diagnosis?
Right.
And what we usually say is, people don't like the answer. They will say is, it depends. Okay.
So how should a kid be properly educated if they're diagnosed with ADHD?
I think the first thing is when there's a diagnosis of ADHD, a couple of different professionals are usually involved, ideally. The psychiatrist or the pediatrician, because that's the medication element. For ADHD, medication actually is the first line approach to managing ADHD, just because there's a chemical difference.
Balance, yeah.
Yes, and so the medication helps, manage that part. But medication alone is not the answer. We always say pills don't teach skills. The other professional that sometimes is involved is the psychologist, the educational psychologist, because there's testing to see where are the learning issues, because learning issues do come hand in hand with ADHD many times. So if we can understand what the learning issues are, then support can be there. Sometimes there's also the emotional side, like anxiety, depression. So that's where the therapy comes in as well, and coaching on the executive function. So for school, it is quite common to have what we call accommodations. So for exams, sometimes the extra time so that they can process it better. Sometimes it's doing the exam in a different room, so there's less distractions. And for some kids, they have dysgraphia, like the writing issues. So they're allowed to type the answers. So these are some of the accommodations.
What about adults? At what point, do they say, maybe I have ADHD because I have, these different quote unquote symptoms, or I hear people talking about? How does that come about?
Well, I think couple of things. As mentioned earlier, we do know that there's very little awareness about ADHD, particularly among adults. So we understand that about 80% of adults with ADHD don't know they have ADHD. So the first challenge is actually, how do you get them to know that there's such a thing called ADHD that might apply to adults? And so what Unlocking ADHD and I have been doing is that we've been going to speak at some of the companies. There's more interest right now in diversity, equity, inclusion. How to have a more diverse workforce, more inclusive, and the term neurodiversity, differently wired brains, is getting more traction.
Okay.
So I've been going and giving presentations and panel discussions with many of the multinationals.
Right.
So that's one way to get more people interested. I brought this with me. This is our Restart Starter Kit. It's available free from the Unlocking ADHD website. Inside, we incorporated the WHO, World Health Organization, self-test on adult ADHD.
Okay.
So when I do our corporate talks, we actually send the QR code or a link ahead of time.
Yeah.
So when the company sends that mailer internally, they invite people who want to come for the talk to do it ahead of time. So pique the curiosity.
Right. Yeah.
So that also makes it something that's more of a conversational starter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So again, going back to the corporate world, or how do adults figure something out, we've also seen an increase in the use of social media. And more people going on TikTok to share about their own experience. So I think people probably are exposed online to this. And then if we do more exposure in terms of giving people tools and resources, they can help themselves. Usually what we're doing in our talks is actually two aspects. One is from the corporate aspect. If they notice someone at work struggling with certain of the symptoms that was described for children, how can they support them so that they don't end up either being fired, or resigning because they're just completely overwhelmed.
Right.
Because if the company hired them in the first place, there were strengths or experiences that would have been beneficial.
Yeah.
And firing or having someone resign on you, you're actually having opportunity costs.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we are trying to work with companies to understand how to support this better and how to put in things, other areas, not just peer support, but also practical things like more frequent check-ins at work.
Okay.
And also there's accountability.
Right.
things like being able to identify where people's strengths are and their interests. A good example would be in the area of sales. Many people with ADHD tend to be very good salespeople.
Interesting.
Because there's some who are more extroverted, good at talking, connecting, and the fact that a sales job is very different from day to day,
right.
meeting different people, so it keeps the interest up. But they may be really bad at filing all those expense reports
Got
and
it.
all those things, right?
Yeah.
And they usually are like lagging far behind in all those claim submissions and report submissions. So if someone's a fantastic salesperson and doing great job bringing in all those contracts, could they get someone to help this person out with the stuff that he doesn't do as well?
Right.
Farm that out to an assistant, right? Or get a PA for someone, that might need more help but super talented in other ways. The other thing from company point of view is what we think as a traditional way of recognizing someone's achievement and promoting them by giving them a managerial position. Is that the best way to recognize someone who's neurodivergent? Because
that is very
managers have a
interesting.
lot of paperwork, right?
Yeah.
They have to do team performance appraisals and all that.
Yeah.
Is that really playing to the person's strength? So we really want to bring a very mindful kind of strength-based perspective on how do you support adults in the workplace, is to
Yeah.
identify strengths and
Correct.
put them in areas that can leverage that. And in areas of challenge, can it either be supported or can you delegate it?
Yeah.
Right? But on the flip side, for the individuals who are going into the workforce or in the workforce who are struggling, it is to, number one, equip them with resources to help themselves, but also to do those coaching things like on the executive function.
Yeah. Right.
to
Yeah. We
be
were talking
able
about that
to-
earlier. Yes.
Yeah, to be able to like step outside, get a different perspective, to manage maybe the intrusive thoughts
Okay.
or the rumination.
Can you give us a couple examples, like really quickly? Because I think this is a very interesting framing of looking at it.
Okay, so like in terms of the workplace for the individuals, if I have executive function issues, that means I'm probably not very good at assessing how much time it takes to do something.
Okay.
Okay, and I run into it all the time. And we talked about time optimism. I always think that by that time that thing comes, I should be in a good position to do it and do it well. But I forgot there's a whole bunch of prep behind that and working backwards. So that's why people with ADHD many times end up pulling all-nighters,
Got it.
to get something done because they procrastinated until last minute. Right? So if someone is struggling with things like that, is to have their colleagues or the managers, come alongside and say, okay, we've got this big project, a big deadline here. How can we break it down so that we have little check-ins, right? And be very transparent about having check-ins. Like if you need help, mention it. And I guess talking about workplace, sorry, one more thing is the common question that people always ask is, should I or should I not tell people that I have ADHD? Do I declare or don't declare if they had a formal diagnosis?
Right.
And what we usually say is, people don't like the answer, they will say is, it depends. Okay? And we say it depends because there's so many variables. You don't know the person on the opposite side of a table, how much they know about ADHD,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And what is their attitude towards it if they knew? Because it could be full of misconceptions.
Right.
So when I say that, then suddenly I've turned someone off or
Yeah,
framed
sure.
myself very unfavorably,
Yeah, I
Right.
think so.
right? So I would say you really have to know who it is and what the company culture is like. So we always say analogies. Think about it like dating. If you're dating someone or you're potentially interested in someone and to develop a relationship, you don't just tell them all the skeletons in your closet at the first one or two dates, right? You want to give them a chance to get to know you better, and you want to get a chance to know them better. And as the relationship progresses, then you would probably find a way to share more. Yeah.
Right. So I think for me, I distilled that down to this. We still have a lot of work to do on the stigmatism, right?
Yep.
Or this kind of prejudgment on what a certain thing might be.
Yeah. So the best way forward for something like that is not to say I have ADHD because that's pretty loaded, like a label. And again, not everyone treats it the same way. It's just talk about more of the symptoms.
Yeah.
Like, from time to time, I might have issues in terms of estimating how long it takes me to do something. So I would appreciate maybe a bit more support there. Like if you could maybe check in with me
Yeah.
or, and so
Sure.
on. Or I'm not really good at keeping track of all my paperwork.
Yeah.
That very specific kind of symptoms is very factual.
Right.
There is
Yeah.
no stigma or no label attached to it, so
Yeah.
that we can all be on the same page on.
I think actually more like coming to this topic, I think we are very used to getting something labeled. To the leaders, I think it's quite interesting. Like if I have two candidates in front of me, and if they both declare, let's say I have a very open company culture, I have one with ADHD, one without.
Yeah.
So how should I choose?
Okay, so first of all, I wouldn't choose between someone that has ADHD and no ADHD, because then that becomes a differentiating factor, right?
Yes.
It would be to see, can each candidate do the job scope.
Yeah.
They have the background, the skill sets, the right aptitude and the right attitude towards that job.
Right.
So it should be very neutral in that sense, right? Then the next question is, if one has ADHD and one doesn't, I wouldn't differentiate so much on the two individuals, but let's say for the ADHD individual, it would be, how are you managing your condition? That to me is a more important question. And I think in Singapore, unlocking ADHD probably is a very unusual position of having the most experience hiring neurodivergents. At any one time, my own team has about 70 to 100% people with ADHD on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and we know that prevalence rate in society is anywhere about 5%, 8% plus, right? Overall, I think adults 3 to 5%, we are way overloaded. Okay, so how do we manage that? And I
Yeah.
tell you, it has been a challenge, but it's also been a lot of amazing breakthroughs. And for a 3-year-old charity, we've done a lot of stuff in 3 years that probably would not be possible with a more conventional organization.
Absolutely.
So those are the wonderful parts of it. But because we also know there's a lot of other areas that we struggle with, myself included, so we have to be prepared to address those.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are the things that give us roller coaster kind of rides, that we're hoping to smoothen out. So the phrase I tend to use sometimes when I share with companies is, ADHD is an explanation, not an excuse. But let me unpack that a little bit, okay?
Yeah, please.
Because it can be taken one way or the other. Okay, so when we say ADHD is an explanation, it gives context
Yes.
as to why maybe a person is behaving a certain way or struggles in certain areas, that helps people empathize
Yes.
or give support or have more compassion. But we say it's not an excuse, because we can't just say, I have ADHD, take it or leave it.
Right. Yep. That's yeah,
Okay.
that's-
I like that.
And it doesn't do ourselves as a community a favor too, right? I think we have to do our own part to own the condition and to equip ourselves to manage it. That's a general principle. But that said, as we said earlier, not everyone is on the same stage of their journey. Some people have more access to support,
right.
whether it's financially, emotionally, and so on, or relationally, but others may have less access to support. And so they may not be in as good a position to so-called stand up and self-help. Right? So that is where the nuancing comes in.
Yeah.
But it really is a two-way street.
Right.
Because for companies that want to be more inclusive in their hiring, I think it's fantastic. And I love to have more opportunities for our community. But both sides have to be prepared, company to understand what to do and some of the challenges, but the person coming in to upskill themselves in a way in areas of challenge, so that it's a smoother ride. Otherwise, people are gonna have a not so pleasant experience that might end up being not so good for the community as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to the whole community concept, right? If you have people who are working on themselves, they need an area or a place, a space, if you will, to have the opportunities to excel at their strength. Like one of my favorite quotes are, use people for their strength, right? How do you say in Chinese? 用人用长处.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fun in having a person with ADHD on the team. But again, the caveat being that they also are managing themselves, right? Because I think one thing that works a lot for us is having the right kind of difficult challenge.
Okay, tell us more about that.
Because our brains are wired because we are lacking that chemical dopamine. So sometimes we try to find sources of dopamine. Right? It could be, for those who are on medication, copious amounts of coffee. It could be alcohol, or it could be doing fun but risky stuff like bungee jumping, right? Driving fast.
I just keep
But-
checking boxes.
but in a company or in a live setting, the good kind of challenges would be the gamification, right, of things. Or to find things that are challenging but not completely impossible, but makes you just stretch a bit more.
Right.
Because that makes it more interesting, right? And I like to talk about, in my own life and in our charity, we talked about the 4 A's, the 4 pillars to help us achieve our mission, which is to empower ADHDers and their families to live life to the fullest. We talk about the awareness part, the accessibility, achievement, advocacy. The achievement part, I draw the analogy to sports. And we're just talking about running earlier, right? And in sports, we have this concept of personal best.
Yes.
1 second faster is 1 second faster to celebrate because that's your next threshold
Right.
to go 1 second faster,
Yeah.
right? So having that mindset of pushing just a little bit beyond keeps us engaged,
Okay.
right? So in a corporate setting, finding the right kind of problem of that right kind of difficulty that's not too far of reach to be so like overwhelming and you give up, but just there to just keep you going, just picking at
I
that,
like
right?
that. Yeah.
I think it's a more positive way of reframing it. And when we keep on having the right kind of challenge, we actually achieve more than we thought possible, to individually and as a company.
Yeah. Let's, for example, have friends or partners, in the family situation, between relationships. How can we support, people in our lives that are important to us that have ADHD, and vice versa? If you are the one that have ADHDs and you have different type of relationships, how are some of the best tools to help you make sure that you show up in the way that you want to?
Great question. And I'm trying to live it too in my own life. Like say in a marriage relationship, definitely lots of challenges, even if both couples are neurotypical already, right? But with ADHD in the mix, I think it adds a different dimension. I think for the so-called non-ADHD, either the partner or even a friend or family member is to learn more about the condition.
Okay.
I think that goes across the board, right? Even for parenting, so that you understand where is it the wiring and where is it the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Because if one doesn't have an understanding of that, it becomes something that is almost like a character flaw, the perception,
Okay.
right? Then it becomes very personal.
Right. Okay.
So being able to understand that some parts of it could be due to the wiring, which the person is still working on, but there's a wiring issue, then it doesn't become so like this person is bad or like always doing this and always, it becomes very absolute, right? Black and white.
Right.
You become a little bit more patient,
Okay.
right? But meanwhile, the person that has the condition, and I talked about it earlier, is to really own it. So if they suspect they have ADHD, but they haven't gotten a diagnosis, if they can, go and get a diagnosis.
Yeah.
If medication is one of the ways to manage it, at least give it a shot,
Sure.
right? Or coaching or therapy, right? Do something about it. It takes both hands. So I think that's the way to manage it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful for people who are, because we are surrounded by people and everyone has different stories, different backgrounds, different baggages, if you will, and understanding that that way of thinking, I think really changes the way that you can connect and interact with people.
Yeah. So to give you an example, I used to be, I'm much better now, but I was notoriously always late for everything, right? So I think that happened with me and my husband, right? So I'll always be late.
Do you guys have a lot of dialect about this? Do you talk a lot about it? Do you sit back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm late again. I didn't do X, Y, and Z, but I understand this is my ADHD.
Yeah.
Is
So
this type of conversation helpful?
yes, I think generally yes. And I realized that at least in our relationship, I need to give context to him because if we don't explain a little bit more, even though he thinks I overshare sometimes, but if I don't explain more, he can only see my action without knowing all the different things in my mind that went towards the outcome.
Yeah.
So a good example is that say, he's off on Thursday afternoons and I always don't have enough time to spend with him. I'm always running around doing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I try to block off Thursday afternoons to spend time with him. But there are situations when I need to have a meeting and I'm the only one that says, nope, I don't want Thursday after. Everyone else can make it. So I have to accommodate others. So I'll say, look, I really tried to change this meeting date, but it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, but this coming Thursday, I have to have a meeting.
Yeah.
So I tell him that. So he knows that if I didn't keep that time with him on Thursday, I did make an attempt. It's just that I wasn't able to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's a little bit more understanding, though he may not always be happy about it.
Sure. But I think this is going back to what you said, it really does take two people who are willing to, or in the example of a relationship, those people want to have that understanding and that communication ability
Right.
to support one another.
Yeah. So give and take.
Yeah, it is definitely a give and take. But I think that is like the foundational element of having any type of relationship in this lifetime.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many interplays among relationships, right? Whether it's parent-child, spouses, right, colleagues. And so going back again to the parent-child really quickly is, as a parent myself, right, we're also focused on the kids' academic,
Yes.
right? Asian parents especially, that sometimes we neglect the relationship part and we neglect it at our peril. Because if a child with ADHD needs a lot more support, longer than other of the peers, that means that if we don't have a good relationship with them, the ability of us to impact and coach and guide them is going to be very limited because they're going to be always resisting and pushing back.
Yeah.
Right? And we can apply that to like grown-up relationships too. That's why they're all interrelated.
Right.
But I just want to make that point there that we need to focus on the relationship, even though right now it seems the urgent thing is the academic. But if we just focus on the academics, a very short-term thing,
Sure.
and we neglect the longer-term thing. And I recently read a book by a guy called Michael Delman. I also recommend it. It's called Your Kid's Gonna Be Okay. I love that title.
Yeah.
Okay? And what Michael said is, we are all brought up with this Maslow hierarchy of needs. At the base of the pyramid is the base needs, right? It's survival. So as parents, we're hardwired to be so concerned for our kids' survival. But we forget that in our world today, survival is not an issue.
Right.
It's thriving. And what we look at for survival is very different from what we look at for thriving. Same thing applies for, again, workplace too, right? How can we help people thrive?
Right. Absolutely.
Right? And again, it's to get to know them individually. That's one, it's relationship. But number two is identify strength.
So is there any typical strength what ADHD has? Because we've been like talking about, ADHD has the symptoms and then has the shortage, how to handle them. But like typical.
Well, Erica mentioned a few just now, right? Which is the creativity part.
Yeah.
I guess if I'm talking about myself, what are some of the areas of strength? I realized that I actually think very quickly. So I can adapt very quickly to different situations on the fly.
Yeah.
Okay. But beyond that, out of the box. So sometimes, we talk about a world, I don't know whether you've heard that term, the VUCA world, VUCAH.
VUCAH.
Yeah. V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complex, A for ambiguous,
Okay.
H for hyper-connected, right?
You're
Or
making me
hyper-
very anxious just speaking these words right now.
Okay, so we live in a VUCA world, and that means it's a lot of things that change very fast and uncertain. Who is one of the best people to deal with it sometimes? It's the ADHDer.
Tell us more why, for people who don't have a full understanding of ADHD. Tell us
Because,
why.
and again, it's not like 100%, right? But I'm saying that in many cases, it's because folks like us, we have tons of interests, right? Because our attention's all over the place.
Yeah.
So there's a good chance we have tons of hobbies, tons of maybe different career paths, different fields of studies. So we can pick the bits and pieces that we've put in our experience pack along the way to look at this and see patterns that others may not see.
Yep.
Right? The analogies, and I bring a lot of analogies in our conversation, right?
Yeah.
So that actually brings value especially we're in the idea generation, creation for like a new product, a new service, right? Or trying to help a company go to the next level. I think that
Think
can
outside
be
the box more.
exactly. Of course, if we have too many people like that, it's going to be a bit messy. Okay, so there's a certain optimum mix, but that is one. The other thing is I'm pretty persistent.
And what do you think drives that?
Many things go into the mix. One thing that we've noticed that many people with ADHD have a very strong sense of social justice or mission.
Okay.
A better way to put it is mission.
Yeah.
So if we can tap on that kind of, because again, we're emotional folks, right? So if we can tap
okay.
on the mission part, the missional part, the
Right.
belief system for a better world, like
Yes.
a better outcome, people would move mountains, they would work for free sometimes, right? To get that done.
Case in point.
Yeah, well, like me, right? Because we are missional. And the way I see it is if we have only so much energy, right? How can we direct the energy and the skills and the strengths to create something positive for ourselves, our family, for society, than to redirect it the wrong way, so-called wrong way or less productive ways,
Sure.
and cause certain negativity in society. There is some data that shows that about 25% of the people in prison have ADHD. Think about that, right?
Yeah.
There is lack of support and things go on off
Right.
a little. So how can we tap on this? Because in Singapore, there are many folks I know with ADHD who are actually leaders or founders of charities, social enterprises, giving back to society.
Yeah.
And I love telling stories, to share about these guys to the rest of society, because look, what this ADHD wiring can do, right?
Absolutely.
Let's try and support more people to be productive people,
Yeah.
to do something better for the world, right?
Yeah. So I kind of really like this. The reason I think about this just now is because someone asked me the same question. So we're talking through business ideas, etc. You have founded a charity for 3 years, and you again live with it, family member, and you know a lot of people by now. Like, what keeps you up at night about your challenge, about your charity, about this topic?
What keeps me up at night is because I'm in some WhatsApp groups of moms with children with ADHD and ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And there's a lot of struggles every day from a caregiver perspective. They're not getting enough support. Kids are getting in trouble in school, there's domestic issues and violence. And I see this on a daily basis. So until we come to a certain point in society where we can support those who are struggling, that keeps me up at night. Because there's a lot of parenting courses and workshops, but those are for general application.
Right.
Because ADHD families have different challenges and considerations. Not everything that is generic can be nicely applied to us. So we need certain kind of nuanced understanding of the different dynamics and issues that need to be addressed. But without more awareness or more people equipped with that, we're not getting really, I guess, on point or optimized kind of strategies that could work. So that's what keeps me up.
I'll let you answer. But what's one thing you really wish that you can have now to help deal with some of these challenges that you're facing?
So I think the better was resources, because resources is not just money, right? It could be people.
Yes.
People with a certain understanding or background or the skills or the heart
Right.
that want to do something. And so right now we are very much under resourced, and it's not just us, it's something global. We know that, let's say in the UK, there's such a demand for a diagnosis and management and lack of medication. There's a shortage, right? So there are actually people who are struggling every day to get work done, to get through a day. So there's a lack of resourcing globally. So that's what we're trying to create, right? The resources in terms of the knowledge, the literacy, to our own trying to fundraise so that we get people who are more experienced and competent and can work independently.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we get to know more about ADHD now, and if we want help, what are the channels that we could maybe give some effort to?
I think in general, a couple of things, feel free to visit our website, unlockingadhd.com, to learn more, that's number one. Number two, to share the resources.
Right.
We have a campaign called ADHD Stories, where we get people from different walks of life to share their journey. And the more people can see how it looks and understand how nuanced or how different it looks, the more inclusion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There will be.
Absolutely.
If people want to support us with a donation, that's great. But also download, let's say, our starter kit, share it. We've got a YouTube library, about 40 plus videos on different aspects of ADHD, from our webinars, from relationships to managing money, to charting one's career,
Yeah.
parent-child relationships. So it's really to share, because we have a big excess issue as well. It's not just financial excess, not able to afford, but it's excess like not knowing where to go to look for stuff,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So that's what we're doing. And the fact that OMG is doing this today, you are part of creating that excess.
It's actually quite meaningful for me because I realize like I find the reasons why I did what I did for many, many things. It's not like I'm telling that I can definitely say that I have or have not ADHD, but at least I have ways to tackle it in the right way. Like I have 2 kids, I have you guys, right? I know who to look for, what to look for. I think that's very important. I mean, even if someone doesn't have ADHD, I'm sure some of the 2 kids or the techniques can help them, right? Because I think the level or like the ADHD whatsoever at their certain levels that are like lighter symptoms or heavier symptoms, right? It doesn't mean that you have lighter symptoms, you can't get
Absolutely.
benefits from
Absolutely.
the kit. Yeah, I've looked through the starter kit. I think it's quite interesting, very well designed, and yeah, I think it's quite useful for myself. Erica, help us to wrap up what we learned today a little bit.
Yeah, sure. For me, this element of understanding what the symptoms are, right? The difference between how you realize between boys and girls, especially at kids at a younger age. How can you identify them? What do you have to be aware of? I think this is one of the key elements we talked about. And we also talked about adults in the workplace, in their relationships, what kind of awareness you should bring, right? What kind of willingness to learn about ADHD that can really help benefit for the relationship that you have in your lives. For me, probably, like I said, the biggest takeaway is just knowing where I can go to get more information.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of this information with us. And definitely would love to help support your charity. And then you're really doing an amazing job with this.
Thank you. You made my day, guys.
So
Thank
nice.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Keep
you
in
for
touch. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to our podcast.
My pleasure.